welcome our speakers to the stage, please, to start the discussion. Thank you. So we heard the reasons on why you're using AI for health, for environment protection, for tackling corruption, and for fighting political propaganda. But do you see common challenges across AI for good? And what do you think are these challenges? Anyone that wants to start?
Well, I think, of course, there are. They were mentioned in the previous session by the speakers. A number of them are data privacy. Another one is algorithmic fairness. There are more, like the specification of the goals, right? So I think oftentimes it's easier to build an algorithm and train it and all that than to really specify what we want out of it. So just to mention 3 common issues of the use of AI in reality for the common good. At least you have data privacy, algorithmic fairness, and the definition itself of what we want and what's the criteria of social value, right? And on this last one, the last thing I'll say is that it's super interesting because before algorithms, we didn't have to be so explicit about the objective function, right? But algorithms do not allow you to be ambiguous about that, right? So you really have to specify what is good decision making in this context, right? And that brings light not only into algorithms, but also into the previous human decision making. And I think those conversations, in my experience, are the hardest, actually, not the technical ones.
We've heard many conversations on how to define value in the era of rapid technological change, but we usually hear and read reports that focus on economic impact of AI. So, in your opinion, what is missing to shift the conversation along with the proper investments to AI for social good applications?
In the case of tackling corruption, I think we know what the value of corruption is. It's $3.7 trillion a year globally, so it's a lot of money that, as I previously said, if it's allocated correctly, it means a lot of money invested and that goes to the people that really need the money. However, there is a big challenge because not everyone realizes that building platforms such as the National GM platforms and many other platforms to fight corruption using AI have a lot of return of investment. So they see it as a burden, as why would I invest on this platform X amount of money if I don't see immediate results or I don't understand how it will work. And this is a challenge we're having right now in Mexico. So we have to, I think the challenge is communicating correctly what the value of these tools are and what the real return of investment is. Because really, these kinds of tools and using AI require a relatively small investment, and the return is huge. So I think understanding that part and the value of using data and using AI is huge. But the challenge is communicating it.
Along these lines, do you want to add something? Okay. Along the lines of communications and building on your response, how do you communicate to the various stakeholders the return on investment and the potential impact? And how do you build trust? Because at the core of each application, we must build trust.
For the specific project we were working on, there's like economical loss if people go blind. So the early diagnosis would prevent that, and people would have like a prosperous life, and they could contribute to the economical system. And in terms of doing algorithms not being black boxes, we used the heat maps, and maybe explanations of that kind would help other people gain trust in the algorithms. Probably like in vision applications, it's easier because we see it and we abstract a lot of information. But in terms like of other techniques, we should look on different methods to obtain an explanation that give us like the same amount of confidence in the algorithm.
Yeah, I was talking about that part in the last part of my talk, and yeah, I mean, yeah, there must be a trust into the algorithm, but by understanding all the challenges that implies classification, for example, in this case, and also be comfortable to have errors and accuracies that are not perfect. I mean, I don't think of anything in technology that is not prone to errors, and like I say, accuracy is lower than 100%. So in that sense, we have to transmit this context to the stakeholders or to the investments, in order to say, yeah, there are uncertainties, but there are ways to tackle them and to still make choices with these tools, because our tools, the ones that made the choices, are they. No.
I will only add to that I think as a community and a sub-community, so this is a community of AI and its applications, but I think as a sub-community that cares about the social good and that wants to work on the social good, I think we need to be super strategic about choosing the areas that have measurable value, right? And that I think it's key, because for trust, well, if you can show data, or for accepting errors, well, if you can show data about the previous system and the errors that makes, and then compare it, if you can plot that point in the slide, you know, and show that this is measurable value, this is how it compares to the previous system, those are areas of opportunity, I think, as a community to tackle first. I think we need to be strategic about which to tackle first, and the way will start opening, I think.
I was asking specifically about communications because I think we've seen throughout different use cases, not the ones presented today, but in the news, how there are very good ideas and very good projects with experts involved, but then there's a communication mishap, and people that are involved their data is being used in the use case isn't informed, and this has created not only distrust, but anger, and not being able to move projects forward. That's why I was asking this question about communication strategy beyond technical issues. And yes, Claudia?
Add to that a little bit, because I used to work for the government in Veracruz, and it was really difficult to push forward technological projects when you couldn't communicate with them in their language. So as a technical community, I think it's important to try to understand how you can target those audiences, because it's very different. They think very differently in the sense of how we as technicians think. So if you can communicate with them in their terms, in the sense of we have both the same, like the same target, like doing social good, but we have different languages. I think that is the main problem that we have with that kind of audience. But I think that at the end, if you can understand how you could speak to them in the sense of how they might be beneficial for their community in the sense of, for example, in a political issue like anti-corruption, I think that could help a lot.
Just adding on this comment, I think this is one of the biggest challenges for the applications we've been discussing. I mean, as you said, Alejandro, we're a sub-community and we understand many things, but this is inside this room. However, the impact of the tools and the things we're building goes way beyond this room. So if we don't tackle this barrier, which is letting people know easily with easy language, with a strategy that focuses on each of the different audiences that we want to reach, we won't be able to, in my case, to be sustainable and to transcend. And this is something I've been facing within the government, like trying to communicate how a platform like this actually works no one understands it, and it's something like, okay, yeah, open data, what's that? What's the use? There's a lot of use for it. So this is a huge challenge, and I think maybe we need to invite more people in this room that are not technical and that have other backgrounds to help us complement this part that we're working on to communicate it better.
Definitely. And there's also a challenge of ethical concerns. I remember in your slide, Claudia, that you were mentioning about ethical dilemmas that had presented itself in the development of your use case. I would love, and well, starting by you, Claudia, but please, everyone, feel free to jump. What kind of ethical concerns have you encountered in the development of your different use cases, if any?
But my case specifically with the Wikimedia Foundation case, because we were working with like the overall public that was on social media, we were very concerned about how we can target those people, because we were literally observing what we're doing on social media, so because it's public information. But I think that as a technical people, we also need to have that into account, to not be that kind of invasive and because they might think that we are like the big brothers, you know, like in China in their surveillance system. So I think there is a really fine line in which we need to work as a technical people in trying to think about what our systems imply in terms of ethical challenges with the overall population.
In the case of the National Digital Platform, we have a great advantage and also a great disadvantage. The advantage is that the data we use comes from public servants. And as a public servant, you are, by law, obliged to share all your information. So you have to have an asset declaration, you have to... But the challenge here is, so this means this is information that is already public of public servants, because we're using the money from taxes and from the people. So it is our duty to be as transparent as possible. However, I think the challenge is that the platform that we're building will be open. 80% of its data will be public, but there's a 20% of data that won't be public because it has sensitive information from civil servants. So there will be a point into which the public use of the platform won't be as complete as the private use of the platform. But I think there's a fine line between what information is private, and we have to remain ethical on what the public servants have private information that they won't disclose. So,
again, about the privacy issue, I think it's very sensitive data to have images of like people's bodies, even if it's just like the back part of the eye, and also like having like the diagnosis of a patient. It shouldn't like go to anyone out there, because it could lead to discrimination. So we have to be very careful with this privacy issue, and that would be like my main concern, or the concern I have thought about until now.
I would just say about algorithmic fairness, and taking it from what Joshua mentioned in the earlier panel. I frequently go to conferences like FatStar and others. I myself do some research on algorithmic fairness. However, I think we have a lot of computational solutions for algorithmic fairness. But the real challenge when you go out there and you have a deployment is not really just bringing what's the cutting edge in research about how to balance the false positives across several populations in your target population, but really about defining what fairness is and then satisfying it with whatever computational method you have. So I find it often that when I talk to public institutions about implementing some of these algorithms, not particularly the one on health, but others, I find it that there's no consensus about what fair decision making is. So if you ask even here, if I start presenting some of the definitions that computer scientists work with for achieving algorithms that are fair, I'm quite sure that we wouldn't agree there wouldn't be not even like a 40% relative majority in which one is the correct definition for fairness. Is it what type of parity? There's many types of parities. Is it parity what we seek, or is it something more of positive discrimination, etc.? And there are trade-offs among these different definitions. So that's the hard problem, and I come back to that because in this panel I think it makes sense to emphasize the fact that we have computational solutions, but as we go out there and try to implement them, the world's complexity comes back at us with one very important complexity, which is just the complexity of opinions and goals. And that we don't have solved yet, and everyone here that tries to implement something for the social good will face that, and that will be hard, I think.
And following up on this idea where it comes down to definitions, what does producing good data means? You mentioned it, Pablo, in your presentation. Ixchel, you also mentioned that quality data is needed, but what are the main challenges to open data, to data standardization, and what could be the potential risks and mitigation strategies for data bias?
Well, the potential risk is, I think we are repeating a little bit, but the potential risk is that the people that see, for example, those classifications we do, they take it like the ground truth, or the 100% is the truth, and then they make decisions based on that without thinking or without doing more actions related to, I don't know, some piece of land or something like that. I mean, I think that's the risk, but again, it's the final user. And our responsibility is to tell them and to make clear that there can be errors and repeat it again and again.
I would say that also, I mean, for everyone here in this panel, we could ask ourselves what biases could there be in the applications that we have, right? For instance, in the anti-corruption platform. So if you're identifying or red flagging contracts, perhaps you're good at detecting some, but you're bad at detecting others, and people might have consequences out of that. People might be fired, etc. Right? So I would just say that data, unbiased data, is not a guarantee of fair decision making. It's more something like the prime matter with which you can work with an algorithm to make it fair. So yes, unbiased data is important, and that's a source of unfairness, but it's not the only one. And really, the point here is that you need to do audits. Everyone here that's working on applications, we need to audit our algorithms to see what type of disparate accuracies they yield, and then act consequentially, right? But just tying up to the data question, I would say yes, unbiased data is important, but the real importance is assessing unfairness at the end of the decision making, and then you can go back and see if it's the data that's wrong, right?
I think that's a very good point, Alejandro, especially on a tool to fight corruption. The criteria you use to build the algorithms is very important, because the output you're going to get will show you something very specific. And I think it's very important that you audit that algorithm and assess the data you got from it before you make a specific decision if someone made an act of corruption or not. So I think that is a very big challenge, and that is something that has to be worked on. And regarding the quality of data, I think one of our biggest challenges is the human factor. The human factor means it's humans, the ones that capture the data in the different systems. So there's a huge factor that they may have an error on the data they're capturing. So that's a big challenge. The way we try to tackle it is building systems that have open data by default. I mean, since you capture the data is on an open data format, and it becomes accessible, and it's open by default. So having open data by default and standardized with a specific set of standards makes it better data, interoperable data, and better quality data.
Okay. So mostly we've heard from technical sides of the use cases, but I also read on one of your slides, Claudia, that you mentioned we still need the people. So which role does people play in each of your use cases? And on another note, and just adding to this question, beyond the many technical challenges encountered, what are the challenges at the managerial level to scale your applications?
Well, the first question that we still need people is like, as a lot of speakers have said, right now artificial intelligence is not in a point that can take decisions without an error. That's why I still need people. However, we still have to have in mind that people have bias by themselves. So that's something that you should have to consider. There are some techniques like in research that you can do to try to mitigate that bias. But however, when you are deploying the real world, those things have to be considered, because if for example, in the anti-corruption system, as he said, if there's some legal consequences that the decision of the algorithm is going to have, then you still have a human that can, at the end, decide if the algorithm made the correct choice or not.
In the case we presented, doctors are still needed. First of all, we should remember that it was doctors in the first place who diagnosed these images, and without the expertise of the doctors, we wouldn't even have the labels to train our network, and we wouldn't have our algorithms. So that's why we need people. And then the second part, that it's the treatment part, we can diagnose loads of people, but we cannot treat anyone with the algorithm. So that's why we still need the experts.
And also, I would say, even for training, you could say, well, maybe we don't even need ground truth sometimes, right? So cutting edge, as Joshua said, and perhaps the future is semi-supervised or even like weakly supervised or unsupervised algorithms, right? That means that perhaps we less and less need ground truth. This is the current paradigm. We'll need a lot of ground truth for training. But for what we necessarily have to have very good ground truth is for evaluation, right? And again, it comes back to the auditing. So we need ground truth for evaluating and making sure that our algorithms do what we want them to do. And as you go and divide the population in subgroups, for example, if you care about algorithmic fairness across subpopulations, then you need more statistical power, right? Because then you need to evaluate higher dimensional statistic. That means you need more labels for evaluation. In a case like in ours here, well, we couldn't even do it. We would like to have done it, but we had 100 patients, right, where we were testing it. And for that, you need to invest on it. And I think that now comes to like kind of the political economy of this. It's often easier, and maybe a lot of people here have the idea of, AI is great because it lowers the costs of doing a lot of things, right? That's very dangerous, because you need to invest in good ground truth so that you can really evaluate. And that's often just neglected, right? Because at least currently you don't have the standards that mandate to do it. And perhaps you just train it, validate it in some, or even not even, I know of algorithms that haven't even been validated and are deployed, right? So that needs investment as well, and for that you need people.
Yeah, and you definitely need the global standards, local standard, political willingness, and legislation, which were mentioned in the previous panel. We'll open the floor for questions from the audience. I see a hand raised here and over there, but first here, and then with you. And then I see other hands, but I'll one by one. Here. If you can please tell us your name and your question, and who is it addressed to, or if any.
Hi, my name is Fernando, and my question is addressed mainly at Claudia. So my question is, it's mainly related to your presentation. You were talking about, during your presentation, you were talking about Reddit and 4chan users, and there's a lot of problems like brewing up right now in the United States mainly. For example, I can think of extreme right users of 4chan, or maybe the incels communities that are growing, and committing acts of terrorism against minorities and women, and young women especially in the United States. But there's, I don't know, like probably in another forum like Reddit, where these communities might also thrive. For example, if you're trying, what would be kind of like the main purpose of using AI in those kind of sets? For example, should we try to stop them, or trying to censor them, or not? Or if we try to censor them, and maybe it's I don't know, maybe like a community like Reddit, that there's so many different people talking about so many different things, or maybe stuff like that's been going on YouTube, that some people get censored because they're talking against I don't know, like fascism or I don't know, people like this, and they're getting censored because of it, because they're using words, I don't know, like that trigger this kind of censorship. Like, what do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I don't think that it has a one answer. Right now, there's, as you said, in the US, it's a really big problem. Tech companies right now are discussing exactly that problem, and they're using AI mainly to try to detect this and try to mitigate the spread of these messages, especially on their platforms where they have this power of do so. However, there are problems in many ways in this case, because right now, AI is not in a point where it can do immediately detect something and stop it. For example, there are, in India, there's happening a lot. Facebook is having a lot of problems. That's something that we're working on right now. For example, try to detect lynchings of people where people die, and they're spread propaganda on Facebook. They do live streaming of these things going on. And the problem is when they jump from one place to another. For example, if they jump from Facebook to WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is encrypted, or if they jump from Facebook to another platform where that is not regulated, or their AI system is right now in a position to also detect that. So I think that this problem is not something that we're gonna solve by ourselves as tech people. We need cooperation from laws, from governments, from the tech companies, from the AI community, from researchers that are working on these problems. And I think that right now it's a really hard topic. It's a topic that it's not only happening in the US, also it's starting to happen in Mexico and India and other economies where people more and more are having more access and easy access to internet because they use smartphones. And they have this power to get anything that they want from the internet. They have this power to also spread anything that they want on the internet. So right now we are in a position we act as reporters ourselves of what is going on in our daily lives, and we have that power. I think that I also have to be part of the people that we need to. They need to understand what power we as ourselves have, and what responsibilities we as ourselves have, not only from tech companies, from government, from researchers, everybody in general. Yeah.
And if I can add something really fast to it, I was recently at a workshop on Facebook that was specifically focused on this, doing an exercise on flagging images. And to me, with my team, it was a multidisciplinary team. All of them were racist. I was shocked. I was like, flag it, censor it, everything. And half of the team were saying, no, this is free speech. Exactly. What happens to free speech? And it's my opinion, and I'm not saying anything racist. I'm saying aliens, and I'm saying send them back, but I'm not inciting violence, or I'm not doing anything wrong. So it's such a hard conversation, because even if you use AI to identify possible political propaganda, in the end, it comes to a human individual's decision, either to flag it or not. And I think that decision comes to a conversation that must be held across sectors, and as Claudia mentioned, with legislators, with rules in place, and so on.
Yeah, I have a comment related to that. I also was on a content moderation workshop where people from Twitter was there, and they were doing this exercise. But the problem was that the tweet was from Donald Trump. So they hide a picture of Donald Trump on his username, so people immediately flagged the post, but as soon as they knew that it was Donald Trump, nobody wanted to flag it. So.
Yeah, there's also that. You want to add something? Okay. We have another question over here. Your name, please, and question.
Hi, my name is Joaquin Navarro, and my question is for Claudia Flores too. Do you think that your method about political trolls could be applied at schools, helping students with fake resources by the homework assignments and identifying that?
Yes, actually that's something, in another research that I present here, actually, that we're doing something in Latin America. What we realize is that, as in Latin America, they have a different access to technology. So, for example, if you go more to the south, there's not everybody has a reliable connection. So what was happening is that people were creating these offline materials to teach others how they could identify this type of propaganda. So it was very interesting because, in fact, it's something that I think that people could help. And I think we are right now working, as we were working with the Organization American States, where we're discussing with them, is that actually, because they work mainly in Latin America, one thing that they were trying to do is to try to educate people that might not have access to technology, to internet, because this propaganda originates online but travels offline because people talk to people, you know? So I think that it's feasible, yeah.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions, and yeah, I see a hand raised here, and you already have the mic.
Hi, my name is Pablo Suarez Serrato. I'm a professor here in UNAM, and my question is kind of for Dalia and Alejandro, but also for all of you, because as some of the more technical experts know, for example, generative adversarial networks are capable of augmenting data, so that would be a very good way of having a larger data set for training. However, for example, in the FDA, it has recently been ruled, as you probably know, that these images or data generated in this way cannot be used for medical applications because it has to be grounded on actual patient data. Now, so what is your opinion on this sort of technique, and have you reached out to Mexican health officials? And in that respect, people that work in the government here, what's your opinion about these other techniques of gathering more data for problems where really availability of data is crucial? And moreover, to what extent are we going to just have policymakers that are not technically expert enough to understand how to distinguish between these techniques? And what do you all think about this? Thank you.
I didn't know that data augmentation through GANs was banned by the FDA. I would want to see exactly what that law says, because I would think it's completely absurd to ban it from training, right? Of course, okay, for validation, you have to have, as we were mentioning here, the best ground truth and so on. But then you would ban, I mean, I don't know, like unsupervised learning as well. And I just think it would make no sense if that law really applied, as you cannot train your algorithm on data augmented by a GAN. In fact, most of the papers that do this type of medical applications do data augmentation, perhaps not by GANs, but by other methods. We ourselves do. We are not doing it in the end, but we were at some point. So I don't know. I would think it's completely absurd. And if it's true, it would speak to the lack of understanding. And again, you can train it however you want, but you can really, so the stress of the law should be really on how it's validated. That's my opinion.
We have another question in the back.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you get up, please? Thank you.
I'm Vladimir, and my question is for Pablo, related with the national platform. How can we improve not only transparency, but also accountability. What do you think about some tools like blockchain for public budget?
I think there's a lot of things we can do to improve accountability. And I think blockchain is a great tool and a great mechanism to improve accountability when we have centralized data sets. However, I think blockchain, there's a huge debate on when to use it and when not to use it. People in Mexico are using it for a lot of things that don't really have the use, or is not really useful to use blockchain technology. But I think specifically for contracting, I think it's very useful when you have a centralized data set to know all the sequence and to know everything that's happening through blockchain. And there have been exercises of different organizations that have used blockchain to analyze contracts. But also to use it correctly, I think one of the first things that we have to have is the data, the valuable data from the whole contracting process. So I think we have to start working first on this by standardizing data from the whole contracting process, from the procurement process to the implementation process. And once we have all this open data, we can build on tools using maybe blockchain to identify and to improve accountability in contracting processes.
We had one last question here, and then we're running out of time. If there's more questions, I invite everyone to come close to the speakers during lunch, which is happening soon after.
Great. My question is also for Alejandro and for Dalia. As you mentioned, for example, I know your project treats diagnosis but not following up treatment. And as you know, there's also a huge opportunity for following up and caregiving post-diagnosis. I don't know if you guys could share a couple of ideas of how can AI be applied in this critical part of healthcare, which also, especially in development in countries developing like Mexico, there are still a lot of things to do.
I have a very short-term memory, so could you repeat that?
I know ideas of how can AI be applied in healthcare, but specifically in the post-diagnosis part of the treatment of a disease, for example.
So the idea is that they go to the treatment, and after the treatment they can have diabetic retinopathy again. So it would be like having like these screenings following up treatment. Currently, the algorithm doesn't work for those cases, because when they treat people, they do like laser things in the eye that changes how the retina looks like, which might change how the algorithm performs. So for that, we would need data of patients that were already treated and that they are showing signs of diabetic retinopathy once again. So that would be.
And overall, like on a more general note, I think we're not even the most capable to answer the question, but just to say it's a huge area of opportunity, and there's a lot of companies built around it. There's research at the Media Lab where I'm from of some groups focusing on that, on how to follow up with people, how to just, and it's at the intersection of behavioral sciences and technologies like AI, which make it super interesting but also harder. For instance, how to change human behavior and how to use AI to understand better how to change human behavior. For instance, take your pills, come to the doctor to get assessed every now and then. So just to say, it's a huge area of opportunity. I think it's harder than just a pure diagnosis based on an image, because it involves really interaction with a person, and then it's behavioral and all that. But that's a quite exciting area of application today, I think.
Thank you.
Before closing the panel, I just want to really quickly add something to the policymaking aspect of the social use cases and even industrial use cases. And it is that we need to work with decision makers at all levels. And we need to be able to translate technical issues into non-technical language. We've been doing this at C-Minds. It's the core of our work, becoming an interface between the technical community and the policymaker sphere. And we invite you to join the RIIAA 2.0 MX coalition, which is precisely working on developing a national agenda for artificial intelligence to harness it. So with that being said, thank you very much for your time, and please give a round of applause to the speakers.